Management Conference, reframed this year as a three-part webinar series. We're glad you're here. I'm Jill Costello with the Wetlands Initiative and chair of the ISAP Steering Committee. ISAP works to create a network to support a systems approach to improve soil health and reduce nutrient loss. The 12-member organizations work collaboratively throughout the year to provide consistent technical assistance to Illinois farmers and advisors on soil health and conservation drainage practices. Before we get started, we have a quick poll to gauge who's in the room today, and this will help our panelists frame the conversation as well. While you do that, we have some simple Zoom tips to share. If you hover over the bottom of your screen, the bottom bar should appear with chat and Q&A functions. For this series, we will not be using the raise the hand function. For the Q&A, be sure to submit your questions there for the keynote and the panelists. Others' questions can be upvoted within the Q&A function as well. Live closed captioning is available by clicking the icon. And if you have any audio or technical issues, feel free to chat with us. As the answers to that poll keep coming in, I would like to give a little background on today's speakers. Carl Zimmerman farms 1,600 acres in LaSalle County. He'll be joined on the panel by Brad Tiller, his ag lender at First State Bank in Mendota. Dr. Gary Schnickney, agriculture economics professor at U of I and contributor to Farm Doc since its beginnings in 1999. And finally, we have Martin Barbary with us today, who was appointed Administrator of the Risk Management Agency in 2018. Mr. Barbary is a longtime farmer from White County. All webinars in this series are being recorded and will be available on ISAP's website. There's still time to register for next week's session as well. Thanks for filling out our participation poll. It seems we have a really good mix of, and majority are other agricultural professionals. So welcome everybody. Without further delay, let's get to it. Our keynote presenter is Carl Zimmerman. Carl, let's do a quick sound check.
Good morning, everyone. Everything working fine?
Good to go.
Okay. My name is Carl Zimmerman, live in Earlville, Illinois. We're basically just south of the DeKalb County line into LaSalle County. My father started up here in 1966 as a farmer on 400 acres raising livestock. We decided back in the 80s to start doing a lot of minimum tillage that translated into going into no-till, and in the last 6 to 7 years, we started with cover crops. We are basically a 50-50 split on corn and soybeans this year. Previously, we have grown sweet corn for the local canning company, which was Del Monte, and that really jump-started our journey into cover cropping. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. One of the things that we decided when we started on this journey was we were slowly growing our business to what it is now, which is 1,600 acres. How could we do it without investing a lot of money into machinery and get by with what we had? The first thing we looked at, we had some neighbors that were no-tilling corn and beans. We had been no-tilling beans for approximately 15 years and decided to just go ahead and jump full throttle into no-tilling corn approximately 6 years ago. We made some adjustments to our planter, added some attachments to make the job easier, and it seemed to really work. So what we have here on this slide is a conventional neighbor of mine that's the same size. He's farming 1,600 acres. He's using a large four-wheel drive, around 400 horse, 375 to 400 horse, disc ripping all of his corn stalks. He has a large frame front wheel assist tractor, about 275 horse, that he uses on his disc. It can pull his field cultivator, but he usually puts his four-wheel drive on that. And then he has 180 horsepower front wheel assist tractor pulling his planter, 160 horsepower pulling his sprayer. So he has 4 tractors in his inventory. For us to put a crop in, we drill our cover crops on standing corn stalks after we get done combining. We use our 180 horsepower John Deere tractor. We use that same tractor to run our planter in the spring. And then we have a 7630 John Deere that we run our sprayer with. And new to us last year, we built a roller crimper. With the delay in planning, we had time. We found an old planter frame and took the row units off and built our own roller crimpers to install on it, and rolled approximately 700 acres of rye down and planted our beans into it, and had very good success with it. So our machinery horsepower requirement, we basically need 2 tractors to farm 1,600 acres. Next. We've been tracking our fuel usage over the last couple of years, and I asked my neighbor to do the same. So in a conventional system, he's burning approximately 2 gallons per acre to pull that tillage tool. He follows that up with a pass with his disc, burning a little over half a gallon an acre. Field cultivating about 3/4 of a gallon. He side dresses his corn also, and that takes about 2/10 of a gallon to do. Planting, you can see both numbers are the same. Spraying, he is doing 2 passes to R1. We are really working with the covers to try to keep our weeds at bay, and we've been able, with the right selection of herbicides, to get by with 1 trip, so we're saving 1/10 of a gallon an acre. Doesn't seem like a lot, but at the end of the day, you add the numbers up to put the crop in. The neighbor is using 4 and 0.1 gallons. We're using 1.05 gallons to cover the same amount of ground. I just put in 1,000 acres for maybe an average size farm. So if you're using conventional tillage, you're going to be burning about 4,100 gallons, where we're burning a little over 1,000, and those have been verified the last 2 years. Our fuel guys made a lot of comments about how much less fuel we're using compared to everybody else. Now the $2.75 a gallon diesel price, we know the last fill up we got was only $1.73, so these figures might be a little bit off, but again, we were paying well over $2.50 here a couple years ago. So if you're burning 4,100 gallons an acre, that's $11,000 of fuel that you've burned. We're burning under 3,000. Cost per acre times that 1,000 acres, it's $11.28 versus our $2.89. So we're seeing a huge savings in fuel costs by utilizing no-till and covers. Next. One of the things that we've discovered as we've been on this journey with no-till and covers is we do quite a bit of soil testing. We're soil testing every 2 years. I had the luxury last year that I actually called in 2 different companies because I wanted to verify numbers, and tested every acre side by side within a day of each other, sent the results off to 2 different labs. The numbers came back the same. So we have been doing a BRT spread on all of our acres every year. It's cut our fertility program basically in half compared to what most people in this area are using for a general blanket spread. I worked at the local co-op for 20 years, so I spread a lot of these acres. And a general 2-year spread in this area was 200 pounds of potash and 150 pounds of MAP. The price per pound is current what was paid this spring. So for a 2-year spread, it's costing $67.50 an acre. Our fertility program has been climbing every year. Our P&K numbers are up because we're recycling a lot of these nutrients. We use a base removal rate. And again, since a lot of it's BRT'd, I've got hundreds of acres that haven't seen a MAP application in over 7 years. And we're not seeing it drop off. We're not mining the soil. We are actually building fertility. So a typical spread, which I do every year, would be 90 pounds approximately per acre of potash. And the MAP works out to be spread over all my acres, since we are doing a BRT program, is approximately 5 pounds an acre. Now, granted, we're not putting 5 pounds on every acre. These are just maybe 2 to 3 acre size holes, I'll call them for lack of a better words, where we do need some mat put down. So if you take that out to a 2-year plan with those prices, we're paying $33.46 every 2 years, which works out to be $17 every year. One of the big concerns when we started down this journey was, are we going to be mining it? You know, you're growing basically 2 crops out there when you're using cover crops. So we've been very adamant about testing, making sure that we're not mining anything. And it's been a very pleasant surprise to see our P&K numbers actually rising. We've been lining pretty much every year to every 2 years according to need. Most of our ground is sitting at a 6.6 to 6.8 pH. I feel like we're making maybe some of this fertility that's locked in the soil a little more available by doing it. But it's been paying huge dividends over these last few years. We can go ahead and move to the next one. Nitrogen is another area where we've been able to stay by using cover crops. In a conventional system in this area, it's usually 180 pounds to 200, depending on what guy's yield goal is. We've done some nitrogen testing. We do stock testing every year. We are also involved in NRCS with the EQIP and CSP program. Their recommendation for our ground was 160 pounds of N per acre. So we don't use a stabilizer. We split our nitrogen between planting time, which we put 45 units on, and we side dress the remainder of it. We feel like if we're growing the crop, it's able to uptake it. We don't need to use stabilizer. The nitrate stock tests that we pull in the early fall are showing that we're never running out of nitrogen. I feel like we may be able to even take that number down a little farther and still maintain yields. So if we look at the chart here, the conventional guys are putting 180 pounds on with the stabilizer, usually Instinct. The Instincts cost them $11.75 an acre. They're not doing a second trip of side dress, so it's $87.35 an acre. My 160 pounds, again, we're not putting a stabilizer on, but we are making that second trip on side dress, which, if you figure your fuel and time and use of the toolbar, whether you have to rent one or possibly buy one, works out to be the same as a stabilizer. So the cost is $78.95 an acre for a difference of $8.40. But again, it's the little things that we can do to remove some cost per acre to enable us to ensure a profit, especially in these trying times, with corn being, you know, roughly $3.25 for fall delivery at the local elevator, and the beans are, I think the last time I checked, are around $8.45. These are the things that we're finding out. It's not one big thing that's going to save us money and make us more profitable at the end of the day. It's all the little things added together. Okay. Chemical use in covers. One of the huge things, especially in this day of chemical resistant water hemp, some of the other weeds becoming chemical resistant to, say, glyphosate or some other things, is, especially in our beans, we've been planting rye ahead of it. As soon as we get the combine through the field in the fall, planting corn or combining corn, we come in right away with our drill. We're using approximately 50 pounds of cereal rye per acre. When we go out and plant beans in the spring, those fields are very clean. We're not seeing the issues with water hemp that maybe some of the neighbors are. The only places where we do have issues is where water comes in from maybe a competing farmer, or where we've had drowned out spots that it's hard to get something established in. We've been able to not use dicamba in a wholesale program on all of our acres. We might spot spray 6 or 7 acres out of 700 in a year with dicamba. And now that dicamba, for all purposes, won't be able to be used in a post-trip, that's pretty huge because Roundup is not working on most of this water now. So before we started using covers, we were in no-till on our beans, 2 trips minimum. Our burn down was usually products like Sharpen and Ledger with Roundup. We used Powerhouse as a liquid AMS and drift retardant. The post, depending on how good we did on burning everything down and how the beans were growing, we would come back with an additional trip of Roundup and possibly a small amount of residual if the rows weren't closing in, or we might have to make 2 trips of Roundup. But for all purposes, we're going to say we made 1 trip, usually 40 ounces to the acre of like Durango or something like that. That's $55.25 an acre. The program that we've been using the last 2 years in conjunction with our cereal rye has been 1 trip. Last year we used Outlook and Roundup. This year we're using FlexStar, Zidua SC with our Powerhouse and MSO, which costs us $34.53 an acre for a savings of $20.72 an acre. That's huge. Our fields are as clean as anybody else's. You can drive by them anytime. There's never an issue with any escapes, any weeds coming up. And it's showing us that how important it is to get rye established in these fields. That's going to be our #1 tool in the toolbox to combat some of these chemical resistant weeds. The ground's a lot more mellow when we plant into it, and we do plant green. We started approximately 3 years ago trying it on a few acres. It wasn't a failure, it was a learning experience. We did take a little bit of a yield hit. Last year, over 3/4 of our ground was planted green. We did chemically terminate with the old program the rest of it. So the best example I can give is we had a 40-acre field and an 80-acre field that are separated by a road. The 40-acre received a full burn down with the post-trip of Durango, and we spent that $55 an acre. The beans made 60 bushel to the acre. The 80 was terminated with our crimper roller. We came in with Durango and Outlook, and that was, I think, about $32, $33 an acre. They made 58 bushel to the acre. Yeah, we lost 2 bushel, but we gained on chemical savings roughly 20-some dollars. And beans are not at $10 a bushel right now. So we put money in our pocket. One of the big things on utilizing cover crops that people get wound up in, what are your yields doing? What are your yields doing? We feel even if we take a slight yield hit, it more than pays for itself between the fertility, between the help on the weeds, you know, to keep some of these at bay. The biggest thing is our average yields are at or above county average, and our corn yields have continued to climb every year. Our bean yields have continued to climb every year. So if we're saving money and also yielding better, it's a win-win all the way around. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. So just kind of, I know I'm going through this very quickly, but we want to leave a lot of time for questions. Our savings, $8.39 an acre on fuel, $17 on fertilizer, $8 on nitrogen, chemicals, $20, for a total of $54.53 an acre. The cost of the covers, that is, I put the $22.70 in there. That's a fairly detailed blend of covers, maybe 5 or 6 species. If you're going to do something as simple as cereal rye, you're looking at $16 an acre. But I figured I would use our most expensive cover crop mix for this example. So our total savings per acre are $31.83 an acre. We go to the next slide, it's going to show what kind of yield hit that you could afford to take if you actually did take one. For that $31.83 an acre at 325 corn, if you're approximately 10 bushel the acre under the average, you're breaking even. We're not seeing that. We're usually 2 to 3 better every year, it seems like. On bean acres at 860 a bushel, we can take a 4 bushel to the acre hit. Again, we're not seeing that. We're staying right at our average or slightly increasing just every year. Go ahead. Benefits beyond the budget. There's been a lot of talk about what cover crops do. When we started on this journey, the first thing was, like I said, we had grown sweet corn for Del Monte for quite a few years. A lot of times it's harvested end of August, beginning of September. That ground was sitting bare for months. Sometimes we'd have weeds pop up and we'd have to go out there and spray it with Roundup and 2,4-D to try to keep everything at bay so we didn't have a seed bank for next year. Or we were resorting to doing full tillage on it, running a chisel plow across it, and then coming back in the spring and disking it to leveling or running a field cultivator. We wanted to stop the madness. That's why we started into cover crops. What we've seen since that is our soil aggregate stability and our load carrying capability increasing. A big aha moment that we had a few years ago was we were combining beans. The neighbor directly beside us was combining beans. We had the same size combines. They were both 9560 John Deere's, 30-foot platforms, same size tires. They were a full tillage farm. We were no-till and covers. We had had some rain. I went out and started combining. The neighbors decided to jump out there and combine since we were going. They were cutting ruts anywhere from 6 to 10 inches deep. He was having to back out of his wetter areas and go around them and leave them to come back later. We didn't leave a cleat mark across our fields. It will hold the machinery better. Even last year with the extreme wetness that we had, we never had a problem going across any of our fields. It can almost be a detrimental thing because even though it will carry the machinery and not leave ruts, it's still pretty wet underneath when you're planting. So we've had to learn to read the soil differently than we would in a conventional system. The increased biological activity has led to an increase in residue degradation. So our corn stalks, everything is a Smart Stacks hybrid that we use. The stalks don't break down really that easy. With the increase in microbial activity, they're breaking down quicker and quicker every year. So it's important for us to get these acres covered so we don't have bare ground sitting there. A friend of mine that I farmed 16 acres for, we've been doing no-till corn on corn with covers the last 7 years. And we decided to go out one day after a rain to do a little shovel test. We took a spade out, we started digging down, and out of one spadeful, we counted 23 earthworms out of our no-till and covers. Right across a grass walkway was a neighbor who was also corn on corn, but in a conventional system. We took the same amount of spadefuls out, we counted 2 earthworms out of our sample. So that's a huge difference in managing our water. We're able to hold some of these intense rain events a lot better than everybody else without having huge ponds out there. We're still tiling, trying to fix some of the low-lying areas, but we don't need to go in and grid pattern everything. A lot of people are talking about how the yields increase. Yes, the yields are increasing, but it's not so much the better areas are increasing. We're removing a lot of our variability in some of the underperforming areas. We're getting that ground to breathe better using covers. We're bringing up fertility from years gone by, or unlocking the fertility that's still in the ground. So when we combine, we're seeing a lot less discrepancy in our yield maps as compared to before, And now we're seeing that, yes, our yields are increasing every year because of that. You can have the best part of the ground that's correctly tiled and everything. If you go out and do cover crops, you're probably not going to see that huge of an increase. But in your poor ground, in your less well-drained ground, you're going to see a tremendous increase. And the last thing is the less weed pressure. Like I say, water hemp's a big issue around here. That with dicamba being taken away as a tool that we could use, we're going to have to do something. There's really nothing new in the chemical pipeline that's coming down to combat some of these weeds. Let's work with Mother Nature instead of working against her. We're going to go ahead, we're going to put the covers out there. We're going to cover that ground up. And whether it's due to decreased germination because of more moisture, maybe that ground's a little cooler, or some people believe in the natural toxins that like cereal rye puts out helps keep some of these weeds at bay. Whatever it is, whatever you believe in, it works. I'm here to tell you, anywhere we can get rye established, we don't have a problem with weeds. Our biggest problem in establishing cover crops is getting it established everywhere in the wet holes. We're going to change it up a little bit this year. We're going to double back and probably actually use double the amount of cereal rye, anywhere from 100 to 120 pounds in those wet holes, or where water washes across from maybe a neighbor or a ditch, just to have cover out there to keep this at bay. Because like I said, where we do have problems with water hemp are in those areas, but they're a very small spot. We can go out with a ranger and take care of most of them. Where to start? Well, this comes off of, I don't know if anybody has seen me speak during the winter. I usually make about 3 or 4 trips during the winter talking to various groups, but this is always the last picture in my slideshow. I've had a lot of people stop and ask me, looking at my field saying, well, how do you do it? The biggest thing is to start small. You don't have to go out and do your whole farm. We started with 40 acres of cover crops and no-till. We're now up to 1,600 in 7 years. So what you're going to want to do is start small. Take a problem area in your field or a problem field. Make the long-term commitment to do it. This is not, oh yeah, year one, you're going to see a great result from it. You have to do it, because for every success you have, you're going to have a failure. I never say it's a failure, it's a learning experience for us. So we're going to make that long-term commitment to that patch of ground to utilize cover crops, to utilize no-till. Don't expect the same results every year. Look at the overall big picture. What is it doing for our soil health? What's it doing for our weed pressure? What's it doing for our fertilizer bill? Maybe we can start taking a little nitrogen away or a little P and K away from that area and not see a yield hit. Then that's going to give you the confidence to move into more acres. Talk with local farmers that have had success. I've been very fortunate to make some good friends in this journey that were cover cropping before I had. And we communicate probably once every 2 weeks or once a week, just to share ideas and try things. It goes back to even selecting hybrids. There's all sorts of data from your seed companies, from first trials of what numbers made the most yield. Unless it's on your farm, you're never going to know. You have to make the commitment to be your own test farm, to try things. And that's what we've done. Even in our bean program, this area is usually on maturity a 2.7 to a 3.0 maturity on beans. We've got 7 years of data using climate field view showing that in our case, in our ground, the way that we're farming, anything over a 2.5, we do not see a yield increase. So we're planting a 2.0 to a 2.5 variety on most of our bean ground. The corn, we're 101 day up to 111. The majority of our hybrids are in the 107 range, and I know most of my neighbors are planting 111 day corn to 113. We're pulling the same yields as ours. We're transitioning to more earlier hybrids to broaden our planting window and hopefully get the harvest started a little sooner without sacrificing yield, but basically get that harvest started earlier so we can get in there and get these cover crops established. And the biggest thing for anybody listening, anybody that you talk to, this is not a race. It is a journey. It's a journey with no end. We learn more every year. We reach out to people like NRCS. We reach out to like-minded individuals. Simple subscription to something like the No-Till Farmer. There's lots of great information in there. Figure out what works for you and put it to use. Because another thing that's going to happen more than likely in the years to come, we've already seen it in the Chesapeake Bay area with fertility management. They're going to have a plan for it. We're located in the biggest watershed in the United States, from the Mississippi River. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when we're going to have everything verified. Why not get started early? That's been our attitude. Let's show the legislatures that we know what we're doing. We are starting to test for nitrates out of our tiles. We're implementing cover crops. Let's beat them to the punch on this, people. That's the biggest thing you can do.
All right, Carl, I'm going to stop you there because we have some questions that are coming line up. Just to remind everybody, if you have questions, please enter them within the Q&A function, and you can also upvote some of those with the little thumbs up thing. You just click on that and you can upvote those. To start the Q&A, let me introduce our moderator, Jean Brokish with American Farmland Trust, who is also the ISAP coordinator. Once again, please enter your questions in the Q&A.
Great, thanks, Jill.
Go ahead,
and thank you to Carl for that great information. We have some questions for Carl that I'm actually going to hold off because I want to hear from some of our panelists first. Jill mentioned earlier that we have Brad Pillar, who is the ag lender at First State Bank, Dr. Gary Schnittke, ag economist at U of I, and Martin Barbary with Risk Management Agency. And our first question goes to you, Brad. You know, Carl shared some of his budget and balance sheets with us. Just wondering what it's been like for you to work with Carl and during this journey, and in terms of kind of revelations from a financial perspective.
Perfect. Hi, everybody. I've known Carl probably I think for 20 years now. So I worked with him for a couple of years, and I've seen how he has progressed really in the past 20 years. Being on the financial side, I can see or have seen recently how this has affected him in a good way. The way Carl has grown and what he's done as far as cost and yields, which I have not seen a yield drop in his records, he's been able to grow within. He's not borrowing more money or asking for more money. He's got this figured out financially, how to make it work. And it's a great program he has, I believe. And he's a great customer that I don't have to worry about because of how he handles his financials. His records are proving it. His trends are going straight up. Obviously, last year, everybody had problems in this area, so it was a little hiccup. But if you look over at the overall trends in Carl's operation, it's great. He's going to continue to get better at what he does, and I haven't seen a drop off in anything for Carl.
Great, interesting. Gary, I know you do some work with the Precision Conservation Management Program and work with growers across different parts of the Corn Belt or in Illinois. Are you seeing similar trends with growers adapting soil health practices through the PCM program?
Yeah, and obviously Carl's a very good manager, and he has made cover crops work for him. And what we're seeing with PCM is also is particularly in this time of lower prices, that any way we can lower those costs is a good thing, and we're seeing PCM farmers making that work in through nitrogen management, tillage, and also cover crops.
Uh-huh. Is there anything kind of in terms of exciting developments with the different growers within PCM?
Yeah, there is. We're seeing a lot. 2019 was a tough year for everybody, as everybody knows with the wet weather. But we saw some very good trends. Probably the biggest thing that we're finding from PCM operators right now, or one of the things that we're focusing on, is the nitrogen side of things, and noting that those rates that are suggested by a lot of agronomists of 180 to 200 pounds of N actually are the rates that are the profit maximizing alternatives. And just as Carl has shown some of those reductions in fertility rates, that does have an impact on returns in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you.
Hey, Gene, this is Brad again.
Yeah.
I want to note too, I think Carl said it at the end there, to start small. In this environment, I think we got to think outside the box to find a niche, maybe not a niche, but think outside the box, how farmers can be more profitable. And Carl figured this out 6 years ago or 7 years when he started thinking outside the box. So that is something big. And I talked to several customers I have that maybe they need to think outside the box. And this is something that Carl has proven works for him. So I have recommended customers to think outside the box, and maybe someday Carl can interject here, help us think outside the box more. But thinking outside the box in this environment, and Gary would understand too, just planting corn and beans and harvest, if you look at the bottom line, it's not there at these prices. So I just appreciate Carl thinking outside the box, and he's ahead of the game.
Yeah, actually, there was a question similar to that, kind of wondering if Carl has had any luck convincing his conventional neighbor through all of these comparisons. So that's kind of a rib on it, but more broadly speaking, how is it working? Are you successfully influencing some neighbors, either through Carl, your conversation, or Brad, as you're working with other clients of yours? I'd be curious to kind of hear how some of those conversations go.
It's very interesting. Our shop at times feels like it has a revolving door on it, with neighbors stopping in, wanting to take a look at things, asking questions. I always tell everybody, you really have to change your outlook and change, like Brad said, think outside the box. Be willing to take what they consider a risk. My neighbor that I got the figures from, he's probably one of my best friends. We get together once every 2 weeks at his shop and have a couple of cocktails and just talk about life in general and farming, and always comes around to this subject. For years, he loves his iron. He loves tillage. He told me here about a month ago, he says, you know what, this isn't working for me anymore. I've got to change. So he's in the process of buying a seeder for his vertical tillage tool. And this year is going to be his first year of utilizing cover crops. And for his ground, we have gently rolling ground. He farms some ground that is probably borderline HEL. It's got a lot of pitch to it. And I've told him for years, you got to quit. You can't keep ripping the earth open and expecting a different result. One of my favorite sayings is, what's the definition of insanity? It's doing the same thing over and over again and expecting the same results, or expecting better results. And so, yeah, we've gotten a few people to kind of come around to this way of thinking, but it is hard for a lot of people to make that jump. It's a leap of faith. And even though your neighbor might have great success with it, everybody is worried about making that payment or trying to pay everything off, and they want to hit a home run, whether it be grain marketing or raising the crop. I'm more of a guy, I'll take a double and a triple every time because I'm on base, I'm moving forward. And that's what we found out is we may not have the top of the top yield, but we certainly don't have the bottom. And instead of chasing after maximum yield, how about we chase after maximum return on investment?
Just this is Gary again. Just a note on the tillage side of things. One of the things that we do see in PCM is that a lot of farms have a very different tillage systems out there, and we don't see in that data any sort of advantage to a lot of tillage, 2+ passes, etc. What we do see is those farms that no till and one pass sort of systems have the same sort of yields, and often have higher yields than the more tillage systems. And when you're looking at that, it's not only the fuel savings that you have, but as you move to lower tillage, the machinery and equipment depreciation, interest on that is a very important thing, and you always see that in terms of farm profitability. Those farmers that maintain a proper level of machinery for their size of farm will just tend to be more profitable than those that have larger amounts of equipment.
Mm-hmm. Figuring out what works right. I'm going to ask, I think, Martin, you're on. We can, if you want to turn your video on, you can, or we can have a beautiful picture of you up. There we are.
I'll show my face here in DC. Everybody needs to see DC involved in this.
So, thinking outside the box, we just kind of had that conversation, and I'm curious, as a risk management agency, how much room is there for agents and field staff to look at these innovative practices and incorporate those as you're working with clients in terms of insurance and the other services RMA provides?
Yeah, absolutely. Our role in this is important in that it evolves around setting rates. It evolves around loss adjustment. It evolves around making sure producers get the right, everything's right. It starts with training. It starts with on the ground know-how. Our regional offices, there's 10 regional offices across the country. Those staff continually works with a group called NCIS, it's National Crop Insurance Services. They work together. They do training for all of our adjusters and agents. They're required. It's a farm bill requirement that we train those every year. Anytime we have a new practice coming in their area, this not only includes sustainable practices, but also organic practices that are new and the different, different processes to weigh things that those of us growing up a long time ago, I'll say, had a different view about that. Frankly, I've been no-tilling since the 70s, off and on. It's come and gone. But we do, our requirement is that we train everybody, and we make sure that that's done in a way that new practices are taken into account in our procedures and how we adjust and set rates.
Great. Carl, there's a couple questions that came in from audience members. There was some interest in whether you incorporate any grazing of the cover crops into your overall operation.
No, we don't. We raised livestock up until around 1993. It was to the point that we were going to have to invest pretty heavily in buildings. We lost a lot of our packers in this area, so we had less of an outlet for the product. So that was the decision we made back then, was to go more heavily into no-till and try to cut some costs that way. I've talked with a couple of local guys that grow cattle about possibly doing something like that. We've just never been able to come to terms with what we want to do. We do employ a lot of buffers and waterways around most of our area. We will go through the FSA on some of it, but we're trying to be flexible enough that if we see a problem area developing, whether it's due to peripheral washing or something like that, that we just voluntarily go in and we'll take, you know, a quarter acre out of production. Along creek banks, we've extended from 30 to 60 foot just to give an area for pollinators, maybe try to get some of these beneficial insects going in our area. The wildlife has been increasing, and it's been able to handle some of these extreme rain events a lot better without washing away your inputs and your crop and your soil. We feel very comfortable that we're not losing hardly any soil. I know they say with the increase in organic matter and doing the no-till that we should be actually increasing our topsoil, but it's going to be at such a slow rate. It's going to be my son's noticing it rather than me. But yes, we've definitely looked into grazing because that seems to be the key to the missing puzzle in incorporating no-till and covers. By having animals out there chewing on it, you know, it generates new growth on the covers. Plus, you've got a free fertilizer dispersal system going there too. So,
Sure.
definitely something we're looking into.
Yeah. Plus, I would imagine it's an opportunity for additional income. Looking at your balance sheets, you know, it increases that profit margin. Similarly, just wondered if you mentioned you work with NRCS. Have you participated in any of the Farm Bill cost share programs? They have some, you know, some funding to help implement some of these practices. Do you have experience with those?
Yes, we've gone through NRCS with both the EQIP and CST programs. We're in our final year of that program. We are looking into some new electives that we're going to implement, maybe a more diverse cover crop mix. It's definitely well worth anybody that's looking into doing a program like this to go to your local office and talk with them, because you know, if you are approved, the money's there. And as you're transitioning, it makes it a lot easier to do it. I'm a big believer in it, but we're getting far enough along in our program. I don't want to use the term handicapped or handcuffed, but we want to really be able to explore and really push the envelope on what we're trying to do now, because we've seen so many great benefits in the last 7 years of doing this.
Mm. Brad, do you have anything to add in terms of maybe working with other clients who might be working with NRCS or FSA programming?
Yeah, I actually do have a couple other customers. It is, I guess you can also say that's kind of thinking outside the box, because there is programs out there, and Carl is taking advantage of them. And I've seen other growers take advantage of it, you know, based on, you know, some no-till and conservation stuff. And even, you know, agreeing with Gary, it's tight right now. And, you know, these programs are out there that people need to realize that they can get money. I do encourage people to look into the conservation and what you can do to add value to your farm and your balance sheet.
Great. So one question, I think, Carl, you may have mentioned this a little bit. You know how you're trying to adjust your harvest time to make sure you have enough time to get the covers planted in the fall. Some years are probably better than others. But could you talk a little bit about any adjustments at the spring season in terms of getting your covers terminated and how that affects your planting timing, particularly kind of compare that to a conventional neighbor that doesn't have to deal with the cover on the field?
Okay. When we first started utilizing covers, it was the unknown for us. So we, as soon as things were greening up, we were out there with the sprayer terminating everything. That's why we wanted to try planting green, because we've had such extreme events in the springtime. You don't know. You don't want to be out there spraying when you could be planting. Our ground does tend to stay just a little bit cooler especially like this year where it just never seemed to want to warm up. We've had to develop a little more patience when we do start planting. It's not that the ground isn't fit. We need the temperature to be correct. So, starting out, like I said, we sprayed everything. Now we know we can plant in 6-foot tall cereal rye if we have to, and we have the last 2 years. We've made changes to the planter. As we transition, a lot of things have come off the planter. No-till coulters we no longer use. We don't use row cleaners in front of our beans anymore. We've done side-by-side trips and verified it by yield to see if there was a difference, and there wasn't. So it's made it easier to plant in the springtime. Again, we've transitioned to an earlier variety because the yields are every bit as good as the later stuff, even compared to the conventional neighbors that might be a week ahead of us. So we're very comfortable in doing that. And then if we do run into a situation like last year where it just keeps raining and raining, we can get out there and plant when we want to. The other guys, if they work that ground, they might have to go back to work it again because it turned into concrete. Or the favorite thing is we're going to work the ground to dry it out. I don't want to dry it out. I want my moisture there. So the spraying hasn't really been that much of an issue. Our big issue is trying to get the crops established in the fall because we have such a short window. We utilize, as far as flying covers onto our beans, we use a local aerial applicator. It's about $12 an acre for him to do it. Again, timing's a huge issue. We've flown on usually at first yellow leaf that we see in the beans, we fly it on. Well, if we start getting rain, we've been out there combining beans and had oats, 10 to 12 inches tall. We've never had a problem getting through it. It's a little bit of a pucker moment for us. You're worried about slugging the combine, but we've always been able to cut through it and have a clean sample, no staining on the beans. In a dry year, it's actually helped us. I think it was 3 years ago, everybody is in the midst of bean harvest in this area, and they were pulling beans out at 9%. And with the covers growing in our beans, we had beans that were at 12% all day long, no matter how hot or how windy it got, which was kind of a nice factor. Now, we do have to usually start an hour later or quit an hour earlier than the neighbors, but we've made it work. The big thing is we want to get it established, but getting back to like cereal rye, we've drilled it as late as the middle of December. It's not our favorite thing to do, but it's grown the next year. This year with the late harvest, we actually made the effort and went out and spread it. Just spread it, left it lay, and we had a beautiful stand of cereal rye this spring. It all grew, it all worked. So we're finding that what we think might cause us problems doesn't. We're actually able to farm easier.
Sure. Great. I want to go back to DC. We have Martin all the way here, and his tie in person looks much better than his picture. So I actually did want to talk a little bit more about is there a role for RMA staff to learn more about these soil health, or how do they remain current on some of these innovative practices that Carl is working on? And so, like, first of all, being knowledgeable about it, but then also that how does that influence some of the products that RMA is offering?
That's we talked about the education aspect of it a little earlier. One of the things that's often been taken as a misconception, it was more based on our cover crop termination guidelines, but there's been a misconception that the Risk Management Agency was somewhat against cover. That's not the case at all. We just want to make sure our rates are correct. We work very hard to do that. Our actuarial team run by Dr. Tom Worth, and he will look you straight in the eye and say, we want to make sure our rates are correct. So it's important to note. And one of the things that I think is also a misconception people don't understand is a producer's own production history. It's reflected in the insurance premium and the guarantees he gets. A producer using better, I won't say better farming practices because everyone has their own opinion of what's better, but I would say farming practices that that reduce his risk. That I think Carl put it well in that he talked about how he doesn't see as much variability. That will be reflected in his premium rates, specifically in that. Higher yields obviously get you a lower premium rate per bushel, so that's always taken into account. Again, though, anytime there's a new practice, it can impact risk. We research that. We're studying right now the impact of cover crops and other conservation practice internally, and we even have a submission or two working with our Federal Crop Insurance Corporation board. So, we support those private developers bringing products to the corporation for the board to develop new and better policies. We did revise our rules last year for our good farming practice determination. So now that if you plant green into a cover crop, insurance attaches when you plant. We've not seen anything to change that. We feel like we're really getting a good, things are working. Carl explains it well, and we are following along with that and learning more as we grow. One of the things that's kind of an aside that RMA is involved in is these new state programs that are promoting cover cropping use. Iowa started this a few years ago. Illinois has a program coming online this year that will be effective to get producers a little better, a premium break for using those products. We have 4 or 5 other states even interested in that. So that's another thing that we're involved in, trying to make sure that we understand how those production practices affect our rates and how we can do that better for producers.
So just a clarifying question there, Martin. Are you just looking at yield in terms of the insurance rates? Are you just looking at a higher yield, or you're looking at sort of less volatility from year to year, or consistency from year to year?
You said it better there, less volatility, less, obviously, less losses. All that comes into play in a producer's individual rate. So yeah, the less variability equates into the less risk, and risk is what your premiums are based upon.
Great, thank you. Thank you. I think we haven't heard too much from Gary. I just want to pose one last question to him in about 20 seconds. Give us, we heard from Carl what his advice is to growers. What would be your advice to growers?
Well, one I would agree with Carl to experiment with cover crops, and probably, and Carl, like he said, start small, particularly in this environment, learn. And I think as we move over through time, cover crops are going to become more and more important as companies want sustainable production, and maybe there'll be some opportunities for farmers in that cover crop area in the future. So start now and go forward.
That's the perfect segue, Gary. Jill's going to talk a little bit about our 3rd session coming up next week, but we are going to talk about supply chain and some of the incentives there. But with that, I would just like to thank our presenters, Carl Zimmerman, Brad Pillar, Dr. Gary Schnittke, and Martin Barbary. Great conversation today, a wealth of information. So thank you to all of you, and I will turn it back to Jill for our wrap up.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. I think we learned today how soil health practices that help with your soils, your function, your yield variability, and your ROI. But it does take patience and a few learning experiences, as Carl would put it. So as you begin your journey with these no-till or cover crop practices, Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership and its experts are available to help you with some of that one-on-one assistance that you may need just getting your program started. So as we wrap up, please answer the exit poll that is launched now. This feedback allows us to keep providing you the most useful content in future seminars and webinars. Please be sure to claim your CCA continuation credits. You can scan the QR code with your CC app, or type in your name and CCA number into the chat box, or just reply with your info to the follow-up email you'll be receiving tomorrow, Friday. And finally, thank you to the Illinois Council of Best Management Practices. In addition to supporting the broader use of Farm Doc's conservation lease addendums, they're also providing one lucky participant today a $50 Visa gift card. We'll email you if your name is selected. Thanks again to our panel and our attendees here. We look forward to seeing you back here for next week's webinar, the final in our series of 3. And Jonathan Koppas from the University of Illinois will share how Consumer demand is increasing for crops that are raised with soil health management practices. So thank you, Gary, for setting up that for us. You'll be joined by a tech panel explaining how the supply chain is responding. And just a reminder, all webinars in this series are being recorded and will be available on ISAP's website. And there's still time to register for next week's final session. So we hope to see you next week. Thank you for joining us.